President Biden has ordered a full withdrawal of all U.S. troops out of Afghanistan, setting a deadline of August 31st. And today on Pepp Talk, we are going to be discussing the results of said withdrawal. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Pepp Talk. Today, we're going to be talking all about Afghanistan and all that has been going on. And especially for all of you who have just seen the headlines, but haven't exactly been following the news of what's been going on over in Afghanistan today, it's going to be a perfect episode for you to catch up on exactly what has happened with the Biden administration's withdrawal of U.S. troops out of Afghanistan. But first and foremost, I think in order to understand the full picture and story of what has been going on, we need to understand why exactly the U.S. was in Afghanistan to begin with and what the goal of the United States troops stationed there was. And for the sake of time, we will just be discussing the relations between Afghanistan and the United States since 9/11, but it should be noted that they go back as far as the 1950s when the Eisenhower administration was seeking to bolster ties with the newly Afghan government in order to prevent them from becoming a Soviet satellite state. However, essentially the reason as to why American troops were in Afghanistan to begin with was because of the 9/11 attack on the Twin Towers in New York City. The United States actually called on the Taliban to turn in Osama bin Laden, who was the mastermind behind the 9/11 attack. However, the Taliban refused, saying that only Allah could overthrow their regime. But then on October 7th, 2001, the United States and the UK began a bombing run against the Taliban called Operation Enduring Freedom. And with that, on December 17th of that same year, they actually were able to drive the Taliban from power completely. And then later, in April of 2002, President Bush announced a new Marshall Plan for Afghanistan that had Congress delegate $38 billion in humanitarian aid and reconstruction assistance to Afghanistan. Later on, the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld declared an end to major combat in Afghanistan, and the mission shifted to stabilization and reconstruction, with NATO taking control of the international security forces in August of 2003. Then, much later, in February of 2009, 17,000 more troops would be delegated to the aid of the 37,000 troops that were already stationed in Afghanistan under President Obama for the purpose of nation building. And as time progressed, even more troops would be sent to Afghanistan under Obama in order to train the Afghan army and the police forces there. Then, in July of 2011, troops would finally begin to withdraw from Afghanistan. And basically what you need to take from all that is essentially the reason as to why U.S. troops were in Afghanistan to begin with was in order to essentially make sure that they could support the Afghan people and establish a democratic government of some sort in order to keep out the Taliban. And it is now 2021, so it's been about 20 years. And with that being said, it's very important to know why people would see there's a need for us to leave. It's 2021 and it's been a while. You can see why people might want to leave Afghanistan. In fact, former President Donald Trump believed that we should leave, and in February of 2020, a peace deal was signed with the Taliban, which called for the withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan within 14 months, if the Taliban upheld terms of the agreement. However, soon after the deal had been made, there was a significant rise in Taliban insurgent attacks against Afghan forces, which did not contribute to a peaceful diplomatic solution, and presumably would have broken the deal. Now, with this being said, it's also important to note that Trump previously stated that the outcome of a hasty withdrawal was both predictable and unacceptable. So people would like to argue that Trump also was going to withdraw troops out of Afghanistan, and it's not Biden's fault for the colossal failure that the withdrawal has been, which we'll get into later. But as we see here, Trump knew what would happen with a hasty withdrawal, and there's also terms that the Taliban needed to meet, which they simply weren't meeting with all of the attacks that they were putting forth against Afghan forces. However, moving on April 14th of this year, President Biden said that the United States would completely withdraw all American forces from Afghanistan before September 11th. In fact, the deadline was actually August 31st. This resulted in a speedy collapse of the Afghan government, as the Afghan military was simply built to work with the U.S. military and required close air support from the U.S. military, and they also required American civilian contractors in order to service the Afghan Air Force, all of which was withdrawn by President Biden. And this collapse has led to thousands of American citizens and civilians, Afghan civilians alike, being stranded without a way to get home or get to safety of any kind. In fact, the collapse was such a disaster that the Pentagon has not been able to give out an actual public number of how many Americans have been left stranded behind in Afghanistan. Here's that video.
The most important number here, the number of Americans. So if it's just a matter of checking the number, can you do that and give it to us? Or if you're being deliberately vague, tell me why you're being deliberately vague.
I think I'm just going to leave it at several thousand right now, Dave.
Well, then tell us why.
Because I think the number is very fluid, and it literally changes nearly by the hour.
It's not more fluid than these 11,000, 37,000.
I'm going to leave it at several thousand right now.
So even though the Pentagon can't give the public a number of how many Americans are left in Afghanistan, at the very same time, the White House absolutely refuses to admit what a colossal failure this operation has been. In fact, the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, refused to say that American civilians were even stranded in Afghanistan. Here's that video.
I have a sense that most of the criticism is not of leaving Afghanistan, it's the way that he has ordered it to happen by pulling the troops before getting these Americans who are now stranded. Does he have a sense of that?
First of all, I think it's irresponsible to say Americans are stranded. They are not. We are committed to bringing Americans who want to come home. We are in touch with them via phone, via text, via email, via any way that we can possibly reach Americans to get them home if they want to return home.
There are no Americans stranded is the White House's official position on what's happening in Afghanistan right now.
I'm just calling you out for saying that we are stranding Americans in Afghanistan when we have been very clear that we are not leaving Americans who want to return home. We are going to bring them home, and I think that's important for the American public to hear and understand.
And if that weren't bad enough, she even goes as far to say that, and I quote, "I would say that this is now on track to be the largest airlift in U.S. history. I would not say that this is anything but a success." End quote. Here's that video.
Maybe trying to reach this deadline and get everybody out. Mistakes are being made now that there is a report that at least one of the Afghans evacuated to Qatar has suspected ISIS ties.
Well, first I would say we have a stringent vetting process which includes background checks before any individual comes to the United States. So I can't speak to one individual, but I can tell you and confirm for you that we take the vetting of any individual who comes to the United States and comes out incredibly seriously. And it's an extensive process. I would say that this is now on track, Peter, to be the largest airlift in U.S. history. And that is bringing American citizens out, it is bringing our Afghan partners out, it is bringing allies out. So no, I would not say that is anything but a success.
And to make matters even worse, on August 26th, there was an attack on the Kabul airport resulting in the deaths of at least 60 Afghans and 13 United States troops, according to AP News. In the same article, I'd like to quote, "Two suicide bombers and gunmen attacked crowds of Afghans flocking to Kabul's airport Thursday, transforming a scene of desperation into one of horror in the waning days of an airlift for those fleeing the Taliban takeover." End quote. So 13 U.S. troops were killed, along with at least 60 Afghan citizens that were trying to escape with this attack, and it's simply unbearable to know that that has happened. And then President Biden gave a speech following the attack, and according to a New York Times transcript, Biden said, quote, "To those who carried out this attack, as well as anyone who wishes American harm, know this. We will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay. I will defend our interests and our people with every measure at my command." End quote. And then General Frank McKenzie, the United States Central Command Chief, later stated, quote, "We will respond with force and precision at our time and at the place of our choosing." End quote. However, at the very same time, Biden has stated that he will not extend the August 31st deadline for the withdrawal of all U.S. troops, aiding the evacuation process. In fact, the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, even said that they cannot guarantee that all American troops or all American citizens who want to get out will get out by the deadline. Here's that video.
For people who will still be on the ground in Afghanistan and want to get out, does the U.S. right now have a vision of a process that they will use to get people out after August 31st? And what is the commitment after August 31st? Is it absolute? If you want to get out of Afghanistan and you are, you help the U.S. military, you're an Afghan, you'll be able to get out. If you're a green card holder or someone else who wants to get out, is the U.S. guaranteeing that you will be able to get out?
I don't think we can guarantee, but what we can do is work toward, and this is what the president directed the Secretary of State to continue diplomatic efforts. with international partners to secure means for third country nationals, Afghans with visas who may be eligible for our programs, of course, any American citizen who remains in country to leave the country even after the U.S. military presence ends. There's a means of mechanisms for that. Those conversations are ongoing. That's our objective. Our commitment does not change on August 31st. Obviously, we need to figure out the operational mechanisms, which is the conversation that's underway.
Additionally, according to ABC News, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy has actually called for the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, to bring the chamber into session to at least consider some legislation that would possibly prohibit the U.S. withdrawal until all American citizens were safely evacuated from Afghanistan. But Pelosi dismissed the suggestion as, quote, an empty stunt and distraction, end quote. Furthermore, in an interview with ABC News, Ross Wilson, the U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan, said that there would undoubtedly be at-risk Afghans who will not be able to leave in time with Biden's deadline. And with that being said, there is just, as you can see, a lot of problems arising out of this withdrawal. And with that, Biden himself has tried to shift the blame of this withdrawal to former President Donald Trump, as has a lot of other people, saying that his agreement with the Taliban would have had U.S. forces out of Afghanistan by May 1st of 2021 rather than August 31st. However, as I said earlier, this agreement was contingent on the Taliban fulfilling certain objectives, and such as, quote, sending a clear message that those who pose a threat to the security of the United States and its allies have no place in Afghanistan, while also instructing its own members not to cooperate with groups or individuals threatening the security of the United States and its allies, end quote. But, as I said, with the rise of the insurgent attacks that followed the deal, it does not seem that the deal would have been fulfilled with all of the horrible violence that had occurred after the deal. And it's just important to know that it's very hard to say that Trump's deal would have resulted in a similar outcome, especially with the agreements that had been made by the Taliban and how they weren't fulfilling them. And even so, even if they were to have withdrawn by May 1st, it doesn't guarantee that the outcome would have been the same, because it could have been slower, it could have been orchestrated differently. I just think it's irresponsible to say that the same would have happened under President Donald Trump's plan. But regardless, the Taliban was engaging in violent behavior that was not conducive to a diplomatic solution, which is, again, why I say the agreement would have probably been broken. And it should be noted here that actually there were 0 combat casualties in Afghanistan since February of 2020 until now, which would seem to imply, for U.S. troops, might I add, which would seem to imply that President Biden's responsibility of the deaths of the U.S. troops, the 13 U.S. troops, would lie on him. Because, like I said, there were 0 U.S. troops casualties since February of 2020. And Biden was actually confronted by this in a press conference, and here was his response to that accusation.
Mr. President, there had not been a U.S. service member killed in combat in Afghanistan since February of 2020. You set a deadline, you pulled troops out, you sent troops back in, and now 12 Marines are dead. You said the buck stops with you. Do you bear any responsibility for the way that things have unfolded in the last 2 weeks?
I bear responsibility for fundamentally all that's happened of late. But here's the deal. You know, I wish you'd one day say these things. You know as well as I do that the former president made a deal with the Taliban that he would get all American forces out of Afghanistan by May 1. In return, the commitment was made, and that was a year before. In return, he was given a commitment that the Taliban would continue to attack others, but would not attack any American forces. Remember that? I'm being serious. No, I'm asking you a question. Because before... No, wait a minute. I'm asking you a question. Is that accurate, to the best of your knowledge? What?
I don't think that the issue that, do you think that people have an issue with pulling out of Afghanistan or just the way that things have happened?
I think they have an issue that people are likely to get hurt. Some, as we've seen, have gotten killed, and that it is messy. The reason why, whether my friend will acknowledge it or has reported it, the reason why there were no attacks on Americans, as you said, from the date until I came into office, was because the commitment was made by President Trump, I will be out by May 1st. In the meantime, you agree not to attack any Americans. That was the deal. That's why no American was attacked.
So there is his response. It's not really a response of any kind, but it just seems to me that it should be noted, like, I think it's important to know that there were 0 combat casualties of U.S. troops in Afghanistan since February of 2020 until the attack on the Kabul airport. So it would seem to me that the responsibility would lie on Biden with the deaths of these people. It also, I think it's kind of funny that it should be noted that President Biden was actually given a list of reporters he was supposed to pick on for this press conference, which is a little interesting to say the least. Here's a video of him saying that for himself.
Gentlemen, they gave me a list here. The first person I was instructed to call on was Kelly O'Donnell of NBC.
Okay, so additionally, according to Politico, quote, the Biden administration had U.S. officials in Kabul give the Taliban a list of names of American citizens, green card holders, and Afghan allies to grant entry into the militant-controlled outer perimeter of the city's airport. The move, detailed to Politico by the 3 U.S. and congressional officials, was designed to expedite the evacuation of tens of thousands of people from Afghanistan as chaos erupted in Afghanistan's capital last week after the Taliban seized control of the country. It also came as the Biden administration has been relying on the Taliban for security outside the airport, end quote. And since this story has broke, the Biden administration has denied the fact that they give the Taliban a list, but a Pentagon staffer says otherwise. So it would seem that this list story were true. And if it is true, I'm not going to confirm that it's true. It's plausible that it's not. But if it were true, it would essentially be giving the Taliban a kill list of people who are allies of the United States and its citizens and its green card holders. And it would make sense as to why the Biden administration would want to deny that they ever gave the Taliban such a list. And I think it's also important to note that the Biden administration has come out over and over saying that they are relying on the Taliban for security. And with that, I think it's really strange because these are the same people who harbored ISIS as they commenced the 9/11 attack. And the Biden administration is still relying on them on security. It's insane. In fact, the U.S. CENTCOM commander actually said, quote, to make sure that the Taliban know what we expect them to do to protect us, end quote. So we are fully relying on them for protection, for security, and for information. It doesn't really make too much sense as to why we'd be relying on the Taliban for this. And then next, I also want to talk about how this withdrawal was not just hasty in the fact that we left behind an unknown number of American citizens and Afghan citizens, but also we left behind lots and lots of equipment. According to the Times and Sunday Times, this graphic illustrates all the equipment that the U.S. left behind in Afghanistan. So, according to this graphic, we left the Taliban 22,174 Humvees, 634 M117s, 155 MXX Pro mine-proof vehicles, 169 M113 armored personnel carriers, 42,000 pickup trucks and SUVs, 64,363 machine guns, 8,000 trucks, 162,043 radios, 16,035 night vision goggles, that of which, by the way, was the prime advantage for the U.S. in terms of special forces because we could see in the dark and the other guys essentially couldn't. We also left behind 358,530 assault rifles, which I find a little ironic because President Biden doesn't want a U.S. citizen as yourself to have an assault rifle, but he's perfectly okay with giving over 300,000 to the Taliban. So I find that a little interesting. And then furthermore, we also left 126,295 pistols, 176 artillery pieces, 109 helicopters, and 65 fixed-wing aircrafts. Now, according to AP News, the arsenal left to the Taliban is worth approximately either 18 billion US dollars or 24 billion US dollars. They then move on in that article to actually try and defend the fact that the equipment was left behind, saying, quote, much of the military equipment would be obsolete after years of use. Plus, American troops have previously scrapped unwanted gear and recently disabled dozens of Humvees and aircraft so that they couldn't be used again, according to Marine General Frank McKenzie, head of U.S. Central Command. End quote. However, I find it quite odd that they don't point out the fact that there might be some incentive for General McKenzie to try and make the situation look better than what it is, given the fact that he is, the current commander of the United States Central Command. But I don't know. That's just me. Regardless, as of August 31st, all American troops have fully been withdrawn out of Afghanistan, leaving behind some hundreds of Americans to fend for themselves. And this has essentially been a complete disaster that has led the Biden administration into trying to bring COVID concerns to the forefront in order to distract from what has actually been going on in Afghanistan. And in fact, what I find so just disrespectful, here is a video of our Vice President Kamala Harris actually being asked a question by a reporter regarding Afghanistan, and her simply laughing off the question.
Alex Jaffe of the Associated Press.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Before I get to my question, I think it's important to follow up on the Havana syndrome incident that delayed your travel here. Do you have any sense of who was behind that? And considering that these incidents have happened all over the world over the past 5 years, what do you say to diplomats that are concerned for their safety? And is the U.S. doing anything to address that situation? And then I have a follow-up on Afghanistan. Okay.
So there you have it. She's asked a question about Afghanistan and she just simply laughs. And to me, I just don't understand how that's appropriate given that the United States has lost 13 U.S. troops as a result of this poor withdrawal, this poor tactic taken on by the Biden administration, and yet she laughs off the question. I just find that not morally appropriate or okay by any means. There's also apparently news of the Biden administration blocking flights out of Afghanistan from other people trying to get the citizens out safely, but I cannot confirm those stories' validity. Just thought it'd be something to bring up. And then there's also this very, very important story that has just broken through that has apparently Biden calling the president of Afghanistan before the fall on July 23rd, asking him to literally lie to the world regarding the situation. So in fact, according to a transcript provided by Reuters, Joe Biden actually said, quote, "Hey, look, I want to make it clear that I'm not a military man any more than you are, but I've been meeting with our Pentagon folks and our national security people as you have with yours. And as you know, I need not tell you that perception around the world and in parts of Afghanistan, I believe, is that things aren't going well in terms of the fight against the Taliban. And there's a need, whether it's true or not, to project a different picture," end quote. So I'm going to read that last sentence one more time just to make sure that we understand what he's saying. So this is President Biden. "I believe is that things aren't going well in terms of the fight against the Taliban. And there's a need, whether it's true or not, to project a different picture," end quote. So that's the crazy part right there. Whether it's true or not, he is telling the Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani, to lie to the world, saying that, listen, I know that the fight against the Taliban does not look good. And with that being said, there is a need, true or not, to project a different picture. It's insane that he's actually saying that, and we have a transcript of him saying this. And when the White House press secretary Jen Psaki was pressed on this matter, she was actually responded by saying, quote, "I'm not going to go into details of a private conversation," end quote. Yet she doesn't say how the conversation is no longer private as it's been leaked by Reuters, and we have parts of the transcript. And I'd also like to point out that I believe I'm old enough to remember a previous president to have his private conversation leaked and him actually being impeached as a result of that leaking of that conversation. But I guess that doesn't matter here, right? Because it's not a bad orange man in office anymore. It's President Biden. That's just my opinion. Also, just in case any of you thought I was being simply too dramatic concerning the COVID concerns last week when I talked about why mask mandates don't make scientific sense, I'd like to show you all how this video from Australia and how they are simply arresting people for literally only being outside of their homes. Here's the video.
Sympathy for anyone ignoring the health orders. Even this group of teenagers caught partying after dark at the bottom of the North Bondi Cliffs. Herded to higher ground by Polaire's spotlight and speaker, the 8 boys were placed in handcuffs and left to explain a $1,000 fine to mum.
681 penalty infringement notices issued in the last 24 hours. More than 400 of those notices were again for people being outside of their home without a reasonable excuse.
Okay, so there you have it. In Australia, people are literally being arrested and taken to prison for literally being outside their house. And that's why when I say the stuff that I'm saying, please understand that you can disagree with what I'm saying, But just know that I'm not being ridiculous, or I'm not talking without respect to the facts or what's actually going on. Like I'm not talking out of reality. Like what I'm saying is grounded in reality, and it should be understood that way. And you can disagree with what I'm saying, that's fine. But understand that I'm not just making stuff up just because I'm someone who doesn't like certain measures or certain policies. I am talking about factual evidence and showing how, for instance, how a mask mandate mandated by the government can be seen as a power grab and can elevate to this level. It's going to start out as mask mandates, and then it's going to move on to vaccine mandates, which they've already implemented, by the way, as I stated in the last video, in New York and San Francisco, and is moving out throughout the country. And then after the vaccine mandates, it can go back to lockdowns, and we can talk about how you can be arrested for literally being outside your house, just like they're doing in Australia. So the point I'm saying is that when I'm talking about the things I'm talking about, I am not making them up just because I'm an anti-masker or whatever you want to call me. I'm simply pointing out the facts that there are real risks to these certain policies, and I'm trying to point them out to the best of my ability. Anyway, I want to conclude also with that being said, that this show is not meant to trigger anyone or to be aggressively controversial in any way. I just simply watch the news and read about it, and I find it very interesting to talk about the implications of certain events, and I think it's very hard to stay up to date on the news, especially with being college students, and I feel like this news show is a very easy way to stay up to date on what's going on and discuss what exactly is going on in the world around us. Anyway, with that being said, I hope that this video has helped you understand a little bit better what's been going on in Afghanistan and around the world. Next week, I will see you all discussing the California recall of Gavin Newsom and why some people are very upset that it's happening, and I'm going to try and argue why it is a good thing that it's happening. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next week on Pepp Talk. Bye-bye.